Wars and Revolution, Part 1. The Civil War. The English Civil War, which is from 1642 to 1651, was a series of armed conflicts and political machinations between royalists and parliamentaries over principally the manner of its government. Royalists are supporters of King Charles I and his son Charles II, or Cavaliers. Parliamentaries are supporters of Parliament or Roundheads. While some historians called it the Great Rebellion, others, especially Marxists, favor the term English Revolution. The First War from 1642 to 1646 and the Second War from 1648 to 1649 pitted the supporters of King Charles I against the supporters of the Long Parliament, while the Third War from 1649 to 1651 saw fighting between supporters of King Charles II and supporters of the Long Parliament. The war ended with the parliamentary victory at the Battle of Worcester on 3 September 1651. The Civil War arose due to complex religious and political causes. At that time, England, and specifically Parliament, exhibited a rabid paranoia concerning Catholicism. English Protestants were constantly fearful of the Catholicism being foisted upon the English, whether through foreign invasions or internal rebellion. As a result, the English were suspicious when Charles I attempted to impose a new Armenian prayer book upon both England and Scotland. Many Englishmen, especially the more radical Protestant activists, viewed these practices as inherently Catholic, and rumors abounded that Charles was preparing to introduce Catholicism to England. The king's marriage to the French Catholic princess Henrietta Maria also caused consternation amongst the English Protestants, particularly as she was allowed to practice her religion openly and freely. Politically, the animosity between the king and the parliament could be traced to the reign of James I, who was a firm believer in the divine right of kings and thought that the king was accountable to God only and was above the law. This manner of thinking brought James into frequent conflicts with the parliament. At the time, the parliament did not have a permanent role in the government. Instead, it functioned as a temporary advisory committee and was only summoned when the monarch thought fit. Yet in spite of the limited role, Parliament had, over the preceding centuries, acquired a power of enough significance that monarchs could not simply ignore. The most significant power was its ability to raise tax revenues. Charles had a very different personality compared to James. He was arrogant and conceited, but like his father, he firmly believed in the divine rights of kings. The ongoing tension with the parliament centered on money and was made worse by the causes of war abroad. Charles dissolved the parliament 3 times between 1625 and 1629. In 1629, he dismissed the parliament again, resolved to rule alone and started his 11-year tyranny. This forced him to raise revenue by non-parliamentary means, which made him increasingly unpopular. In 1640, unrest in Scotland, because of the imposition of a new prayer book, put an end to his personal rule. He was forced to call Parliament to obtain funds to fight the Scots. Then another crisis erupted in Ireland. Catholics rose up and slaughtered thousands of Protestants. Charles first raised an army against the wishes of the Parliament, ostensibly to deal with the rebellion. The parliamentary leaders voted against collecting money for organizing the army, for fear that he might use it to establish his absolute powers. Their fears were confirmed when Charles I entered the House of Commons on 4th January 1642 and attempted to arrest 5 of their leading members for treason, only to find that they have already escaped. Parliament then began on their own authority to make military provision to surprise the Irish and to defend themselves. This outraged the king. On 22nd August, Charles raised his battle standard at Nottingham and called upon all his loyal subjects to defend his right. The Civil War had begun. There were 3 major battles in the English Civil War: Edge Hill in 1642, Marston Moor in 1644, and Nisby in 1645. In June 1645, Cromwell's new model army inflicted a fatal blow to the king's army at the Battle of Naseby. Charles did not recover from this defeat, and his cause was lost. Charles was tried at Westminster Hall in January 1649, and found guilty that he had traitorously and maliciously levied war against the present Parliament and the people therein represented. On 30th January 1649, Charles was led onto a scaffold and beheaded outside the banqueting hall of Whitehall. Charles' personal dignity during his trial and execution had won him much sympathy and created a cult of martyrdom around him. The overall outcome of the wars were threefold: the trial and execution of Charles I, the exile of his son Charles II, and the replacement of English monarchy with, at first, the Commonwealth of England and then the Protectorate under Oliver Cromwell's personal rule. Constitutionally, the wars established the precedent that an English monarch cannot govern without a Parliament's consent, although the idea of Parliament as the ruling power of England was legally established as part of the Glorious Revolution in 1688. Here is a structure that helps reveal today's lesson. The English Civil War comprised 3 wars. The first is from 1642 to 1646, the second from 1648 to 1649, and the third from 1649 to 1651. The first 2 wars are between supporters of King Charles I, also called Royalists, and supporters of the Long Parliament, also called Parliamentarians. The third is between supporters of King Charles II and supporters of the Long Parliament. The political cause of the war lies in the animosity between the king and the Parliament. The religious cause is the confrontation between Protestantism and Catholicism. The overall outcomes of the wars was threefold: the trial and execution of Charles I, the exile of Charles II, the replacement of English monarchy with the Commonwealth and the Protectorate. That's all for today's lecture. Thanks for listening.